Back to Main Street Living. Welcome back. We are very fortunate to be joined by a special guest today. We've all been missing sports. We want to talk about sports. So today we are talking sports with former NBA champion Scott Williams, current color commentator. Scott, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on your program. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, of course. So let's talk sports. I've been dying to talk sports for weeks now. So starting it off, let's just talk about college right now. Class of 2020, class of 2021. Unprecedented situation for them. What's kind of the state of college recruiting right now?
You know, the world is a changing. It's, the old norm is gone. The new norm in life is back with us. Even, like you say, college recruiting has changed. You got players now that are decided that maybe college athletics and education is not the package that I want for myself at this time, and are deciding to go to play professional. You got a lot of guys that are switching universities from one school to the next without any penalties. So it's just a bizarre, wild, wild west right now of what is happening. And it's from the player's standpoint of not going to school and going to play in the G League and getting paid. I think that's great if you can secure enough money that you will have the opportunity then to go back and pay for your own education if you're in a situation financially where otherwise you wouldn't be able to afford it. But I worry that players will think, well, that's the fastest route to the pros, and won't think about getting their education at all. I think the mindset's got to be that I can sock away enough cash that I will be able to then go back and pay for my own schooling.
Absolutely. And I mean, currently, I know you also coached in the NBA Developmental League, so maybe you can shed a little bit more light on this, but do you think that players are thinking, hey, we don't even know if school's going to be in session? And I know you played at the University of North Carolina. You played for legendary head coach Dean Smith, who very much valued education. I think he had over 96% of his players get their degrees, so very much a high emphasis on education. I know you touched on that. Do you think that players are thinking school might not even be in session, it's going to be online only, so maybe the G League is the way to go?
That's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that, but I have thought that a lot of schools a lot of the UC schools, California schools are suspending their classes, and it'll be all online education. A lot of these sports programs don't know if they're going to be a play in front of fans in this upcoming season. So that may factor into some of these young men and women, well, let's say men, thought process of wanting to go ahead and go pro and getting some money. My thing is, once you've done that, your college athletics, amateur athletics is out of your future at that point. So in education is just too important not to think that should be a part of your game plan for the rest of your life. So whether that then becomes online classes or going back on campus in a university, you still have to have enough money to be able to pay for college.
Sure. Well, that's all. Those are all excellent points. I know the Pac-12 commissioner, Larry Scott, also said there's no playbook for this. This hasn't happened. So they're just taking it day by day.
Yeah, that's all you can do. I mean, and really isn't that the rule of life is to take it one day at a time and ensure you have a goal and a plan, because you always say, a goal without a plan is just a wish. So right. you have to have that, but you have to take life one day at a time as it is. And with this terrible pandemic right now, that's who knows what the future will hold for amateur athletics and professional athletics.
Absolutely. We're all kind of forced to take everything one day at a time right now. As far as professional basketball, as far as the NBA, where do you see that going? I know I was just listening to the Bill Simmons podcast. He was talking about how 10 of those, I don't know if you heard this, 10 of those players, those big star players, the Steph Currys, the LeBron James, the Kevin Durant's of the world, all hopped on that phone call to talk about how do we do this? Can we finish this season? Is that something you see happening?
I hadn't heard anything about it yet either. I'll have to go back and check out Bill's podcast as well. I did hear some talk about maybe playing in December. That's the last that I had heard. I didn't know if that was kind of restarting the current year or if it was starting fresh in a new year. It's a star-driven league, ultimately. So what those players will have, those top 10 players you're talking about, will have a big input on what goes on. They ain't gonna have the final say, but they'll have their voices heard for sure. The biggest thing I know about the NBA is That's a well-run organization, and they will do everything to put player and fan safety at the front of any decision that they make.
Well, we know we can trust your opinion. 15 years in the NBA, right? 15 seasons, and also 3 of those seasons, 3 straight championships with Michael Jordan and the Bulls, 91 to 93. So you know what I'm going to ask you about the Last Dance documentary. I know you mentioned you have a little pre-documentary ritual. What do you do before the documentary?
Yeah, I've been loving it. It's been like a Super Bowl Sunday for the last month straight because I miss my sports. Spring training, I wiped out March Madness. I mean, you know. And when you're a sports guy, you just look forward to that big game or a golf tournament or whatever the case is going to be. But everything got wiped out. So I've been kind of fulfilling that, Jones.
This is the main event.
Last Dance. And it's been great because it's been about those some of that's been about those 90s teams from the first dance, as I like to call it, that 91, 92, 93 year before Jordan retired. So going back and seeing some of those plays and being back in those locker rooms and how the access they got for all these things, and then learning about new things that I didn't know after I had left Chicago. Dennis Rodman going to Vegas with Carmen Electra in the middle of the season. That happened? That wouldn't have happened with the Jordan that I knew, back in 1991 before he had that first championship ring. Homie would have played that. But it's been really cool. And like you say, I mean, I plan my meal around. I make sure I get my deep dish Chicago-style pizza. I go to Maggiano's and get the tiramisu and the chicken marsala, the red wine. So, I mean, it's an event here in the Williams household.
And then do you get to talk to some of the former players? What are they thinking? What's the review? Did they get this right? I mean, what are your thoughts on the documentary? Are they painting a pretty fair picture?
First of all, it's been great reconnecting with a lot of my former teammates and guys that I played against. It's been so cool. B.J. Armstrong, Cliff Levingston, Jason Caffey, Will Purdue's coming on and doing a show with me. I do a half-hour show on Legends Live on the NBA Retired Players Association's platform and start talking about all kinds of things that happened back when they played, when I played, memories that we have. And that's the biggest thing. This is not like sensationalized, some Hollywood type deal where they're trying to boost ratings and go for like controversial statements or anything like that. So this is just true, accurate accounts of how guys remember their time in Chicago, things that happened, their mindset, how they approached practice, how they dealt with Michael Jordan. It's been kind of cool to see. And the end of episode 7, I think, was kind of the coolest thing because you could see MJ talking about the price that he paid to want to achieve the goals that he did, and didn't always work with some of the teammates that maybe begrudgingly he had to get on that same page to do things that they didn't necessarily want to do. And he got so emotional about it that he called for that break, and the guys doing the documentary, I can't remember who's doing it now, but they hung on there just a little bit longer to capture that.
Yeah, very smartly so.
How emotional he was getting when he was talking about his teammates. I thought that was really cool. Where they go in these last 2 episodes, I'm not 100% sure. But I hope they talk a little bit more, get more in depth of some of his emotions that he had during that time frame, because I think that's the most powerful part of it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people are surprised to see that part of Michael Jordan because that's not really a story you hear. Was that kind of what your experience was? Was he at all an emotional guy, or was he all business? What was your personal experience with that? Serious
as a heart attack in 1991. Now, he was not a nice guy. I mean, he was a good teammate.
I thought this was the guy who gave you your first set of golf clubs.
He was that guy that was so motivated every day in everything that we did. If you didn't come to work, you were going to have problems with Michael Jordan in a way that he would let you know he's got a problem with you, whether he was going to attack you verbally or he was going to get after you on the court physically. There was no in between. You were 100% all in. You don't come in 95% thinking you were putting in some work that day. If you thought you were doing your best, he knew you had more in you, or he was going to push you to try to do more to get on the same page that he was on. He had those smoldering eyes all the time. And
he mastered the smolder.
Yeah, and it looked to me, it almost looked like anger. I was never intimidated by him, but he always played with this ferocity that I had never seen in anybody in sports, let alone a teammate of mine. We used to play, a quick example, I know we got a short time, but we used to play
No, you're
starters against
fine.
the subs, and we never got a chance to beat the starters because even if we kept it close, MJ would always do something to put us away. But he would
Sure.
used to go out defensively, and I got one of our guys, Dennis Hobson. I mean, up in Hobson's chest, wouldn't hardly let him put the ball on the floor, wouldn't let him get off a shot. It wrecked Dennis Hobson. And this is a guy who led the nation in scoring 30 points a game at Ohio State, was averaging 16 in the league. And by the time the season was over, Hobson had gone into a shell, and they had to trade him the next year. It's one of the saddest things I really saw in my 15 years in the NBA.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, 15 seasons in the NBA. Just to wrap it up here, one last question. I think maybe let's see if we can get some inspiring words from you. You've also played a season in Cleveland with LeBron James. You've been around, the greatest of all time here. So what advice can you give, especially, to these college kids or incoming college kids who their plans with athletics have been a little bit subverted and they're looking for a little bit of inspiration here? What did you learn from playing with those greats?
Those guys, well, obviously the competition that they had, but they also had a positive attitude. And they had a belief in their abilities and a drive to want to be the greatest that they could be. Not just the greatest on their team or in their circle of whatever influence that was, whatever community they came from. They wanted to be the greatest of all time on any platform, whether it be the NBA, street yard basketball, playground basketball, world basketball, international competition. These particular cats wanted you to know that they were the best player that you ever watched put on a pair of basketball shorts and basketball shoes. That was what separated them from some of the other Hall of Famers that I played with, the Dirk Nowitzki, Steve Nash, Allen Iversons, Ray Allens. Those guys were good, and they wanted to win. But these particular guys had a different gear where it didn't matter so much that Michael Jordan had played 35 minutes, dropped 40 points on the Knicks. We got on a plane that night. We're playing the next night in Orlando or Charlotte or one of these other, expansion teams. We knew we were going to win. He didn't care. Whoever he was going up against that night, he wanted them to know. He wanted their coaching staff to know, their families sitting in the arena, all the friends that came to the game to watch them go up against Michael Jordan, all the people watching on television or listening on the radio, that this guy's never going to be as good as me. He can't compete with me. Don't use him in the same sentence when you talk about NBA players like I do. He wants the player to realize that you'll never beat me, not 1 out of 5, not 1 out of 25. I will take all your confidence out from you, rip it away from your soul, feed it back to you. When you drive home from the arena tonight, you will feel a sense of loss that even when you go to sleep, you won't believe that you could have ever beat me in basketball. And that's after what he did less than 24 hours before. He still had that mentality every time he stepped on the court. And that's why I always say when people ask me, well, who's better, William, LeBron or Michael? I said, LeBron was great, but he didn't have that. He'd be happy to beat you. He didn't have that whole, I'll be happy. I will embarrass, not only will I beat you, I will embarrass you while I do it. And that led to him achieving all the things that he achieved in sports, the 6 championships in 8 years. And I'll be honest with you, dude doesn't retire in 94. I mean, that team was built right. We were reaching our prime. We were one bad call away from going to the finals a 4th year without Michael Jordan. We would have been in the finals in 94. There's no doubt in my mind.
Well, I can ask you a million more questions, Scott. So I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
I'm all in on this stuff. But you guys told me I had 5 minutes. I can go about this stuff for an hour and a half.
Oh, yeah. Oh, as can I. And so I appreciate you coming on, letting me talk about sports. I know our viewers appreciate it. Thank you so much. 3-time NBA champion, Scott Williams. Thank you so much, Scott.